And that's what I want to talk about this morning. Your ideas, your big, bold, transcendent ideas that are the currency of the 21st century. You are only as valuable as the ideas that you have to share. And yet, many people can have a great idea, but if you cannot communicate the story behind that idea in a way that is deeply meaningful to your listener, then what does it matter? I believe that the ability to communicate your ideas and to tell your story persuasively is the single greatest skill that will help you accomplish your dreams and move your brand and your product forward. As Venod suggested, I study communication skills. I wrote a book. It became an international bestseller. It was called The Presentation Secrets of Steve Jobs, because I considered Steve Jobs to be the world's greatest corporate storyteller. I still do. Next, I changed my focus to the TED Conference. It's not so much about the conference itself, but about this TED style, which has now become the gold standard in public presentations. I watched 500 of the best TED Talks. I interviewed great communicators from all over the world. And more importantly, I interviewed neuroscientists to understand the science of persuasion. And I found that in order for your story to connect in a meaningful way, it must have three components. Your story must be emotional, novel, and memorable. You have to have all three or it won't connect. Let's begin with emotion, since we've already been talking about this. You heard it from Mr. Berger yesterday. Venod Khosla talked about it last night and today. Emotion through storytelling is very important. You have to touch my heart before you reach my head. Last night at dinner, Venod talked about the entrepreneur and passion. Great entrepreneurs are passionate about their vision. He's absolutely right. Passion is everything. You cannot inspire unless you're inspired yourself. But you have to dig deep and identify what is it about my product or my service that I connect with, that is truly meaningful to me and the lives of my customers. Steve Jobs wore passion on his sleeve. Steve Jobs was not passionate about computer hardware. He was passionate about designing tools to help people unleash their inner creativity. In 1997, Steve Jobs returns to Apple after a 12-year absence. Apple, close to bankruptcy at the time. Watch a video clip from a staff meeting around that time. Listen to the role that passion would ultimately have in revitalizing the Apple brand.
Me, marketing's about values. This is a very complicated world. It's a very noisy world. And we're not going to get a chance to get people to remember much about us. No company is. And so we have to be really clear on what we want them to know about us. Our customers want to know who is Apple and what is it that we stand for. Where do we fit in this world? And what we're about isn't making boxes for people to get their jobs done, although we do that well. We do that better than almost anybody in some cases. But Apple's about something more than that. Apple, at the core, its core value is that we believe that people with passion can change the world for the better. That's what we believe.
I love that quote. People with passion can change the world for the better. Howard Schultz certainly believes that. Howard Schultz, the CEO, the chairman of Starbucks. It's very interesting when you interview, as I do, incredible and inspiring communicators. I write for Forbes, I write for Entrepreneur, I write books. So I have this amazing opportunity to really pick and choose and to interview and profile the world's greatest communicators. When you speak to somebody like Howard Schultz, you realize something very quickly. He's not passionate about the coffee. The coffee rarely comes up in conversation. He's passionate about creating a workplace that treats people with dignity and respect, and how that translates into better customer service. That's a much more interesting story. Tony Hsieh, who some of you saw yesterday, I've interviewed him several times for my books. How many of you heard him talk about selling shoes online yesterday? I've seen people shake their heads. That's not his story. The story is culture. And how do you deliver happiness in that culture? How do you make your customers happy? How do you make your employees happy? When you ask Richard Branson, what are you most passionate about? What makes your heart sing? It's not getting people from point A to point B on an airplane. It's disrupting the status quo. It's elevating the customer experience. And now it's taking profits from the dirty fuels business and reinventing the global energy area. You need to ask yourself, what is it that I'm truly passionate about? Not the product that you sell, but it's the business that you are in. And then how do you transfer your passion to your listener? You do that through mastering the art of storytelling. But you have to understand that passion is contagious. They're studying mood contagion at the University of Minnesota, which simply means that when you meet someone who is genuinely, authentically enthusiastic about the meaning behind their product or service, it changes your perception of that person and that person's product or idea. And now how do I transfer that to you? I have to transfer my passion through mastering the art of storytelling. A remarkable thing happens to our brains when we hear someone tell a personal story. This research is being done out of Princeton University. If I tell you a story about my life, the same regions of our brain will actually light up. We are in sync. Researchers call it mind-to-mind coupling. Stories inform, they illuminate, but they also inspire through connecting to human beings. Facebook COO Sheryl Sandberg is learning this. Sheryl, how many of you are familiar with the movement that Sheryl Sandberg has sparked? What is it? Yell it out. Lean in. I argue not one of you would have heard about Lean In if it had not been for a 10-minute talk in 2010 on a TED stage that resulted in a best-selling book that triggered the movement. And why did that video go viral? Why did her 10-minute presentation connect? Recently, Sheryl Sandberg acknowledged that she was going to deliver a presentation, in her words, chock full of data and no personal stories. Chock full of data and no personal stories. A friend of hers, right before the conference, encouraged her to open up, to be more transparent, to reveal her own challenges with being a working mother. Sheryl thought about it for a second, and here's how she opened that now viral TED Talk.
Now at the outset, I want to be very clear that this speech comes with no judgments. I don't have the right answer. I don't even have it for myself. I left San Francisco, where I live, on Monday, and I was getting on the plane for this conference, and my daughter, who's 3, when I dropped her off at preschool, did that whole hugging the leg, crying, "Mommy, don't get on the plane" thing. This is hard. I feel guilty sometimes. I know no women, whether they're at home or whether they're in the workforce, that don't feel that sometimes. So I'm not saying that staying in the workforce is the right thing for everyone. My talk today is about what the messages are if you do want to stay in the workforce. And I think there are 3. 1, sit at the table. 2, make your partner.
I let that run long because we're going to get back to this power of 3 in just a moment. Stories inform, illuminate, inspire, spark movements. Bryan Stevenson is a civil rights attorney, received the longest standing ovation of any TED Talk in TED's 30-year history. His 2013 TED Talk, he knows how to talk. He knows how to persuade. Bryan Stevenson is a successful lawyer who wins cases before the toughest audience. I know you think VCs are tough. He wins cases before the U.S. Supreme Court justices. There is no tougher audience. He knows how to persuade. He studies persuasion. When you break down his public presentations, here's what you get. Aristotle would call this, Aristotle's the father of persuasion. 65% of Bryan Stevenson's content falls under what Aristotle would call pathos, emotion, storytelling. 25% logos, logic, data, and only 10% ethos. I would argue that most entrepreneurs, especially when they're telling their stories, have that completely reversed. And yet the greatest persuaders in the world, and people like Sheryl Sandberg who spark movements, are more 65% emotion, pathos, storytelling. We need to think about reversing our story. But remember, emotion, you must touch my heart before you reach my head. Stories that spread, stories that connect with people in a meaningful way are also novel. They teach me something new. I love this quote from Dr. A.K. Pradeep, not too far from here in Berkeley. Our brains are trained to look for something brilliant and new, something that stands out, something that looks delicious. When your brain detects something new, unexpected, surprising, it releases dopamine into the system, which acts as a brain's mental save button. Steve Jobs was brilliant at this, which is why I still consider him the greatest corporate storyteller. He understood the notion of novelty and surprise and unexpectedness. His one more thing, I mean, that's a perfect example. How many of you watched the 2007 introduction of the iPhone, either live or have seen the video? What is the one part of the presentation that you remember the most? Excuse me? There are 3 devices that become one product. Yeah, I didn't even have to ask you. I already know that. That's why I'm going to show it to you. Because that was what's called an emotionally charged event. It was new, novel, surprising, unexpected. I had it queued up because that never fails. That's the one section that everybody remembers. There's a reason for that. Here's what happened.
A phone and an internet communicator. An iPod, a phone. Are you getting it? These are not 3 separate devices. This is one device. And we are calling it iPhone.
Surprise, unexpectedness, a fresh way of looking at an old problem. This is called, what scientists call, an emotionally charged event. Any component of the presentation that sparks joy, fear, surprise, unexpectedness, that teaches you something new and novel. Bill Gates is becoming a real expert at this. I think he is an extraordinary communicator of complex topics, and he's making them very, very simple and meaningful and powerful. Many of you remember his 2009 TED Talk on malaria and how malaria is spread. What do you remember the most? The mosquitoes, of course. Do you know what percentage of that entire presentation the mosquitoes took up? Less than 2%. But you remember it for the same reason you remember all of the events surrounding you around 9/11, where you were, the faces of people who were in your presence, little details. You remember it because it was an emotionally charged event.
Malaria, even the 1 million deaths a year caused by malaria greatly understate its impact. Over 200 million people at any one time are suffering from it. Means that you can't get the economies in these areas going because it holds things back so much. Now, malaria is, of course, transmitted by mosquitoes. I brought some here so you could experience this. We'll let those roam around the auditorium a little bit. There. There's no reason only poor people should have the experience.
Absolutely brilliant. And I, as a communication expert, I watch reactions, so I like to see the reaction of the audience. First, quiet, stunned, surprised. They don't know what's going on. Wait a minute, this is a little different. Shouldn't Bill Gates just be delivering a PowerPoint? What is he doing? Shock, fear, mosquitoes, unexpectedness, humor. Those are what are called emotionally charged events. This is a very powerful topic. You must make your next pitch, your presentation, your story novel. Teach me something new, or at least frame it in a way that is completely fresh and unexpected. I interviewed Robert Ballard, who's a wonderful storyteller. In fact, he gave a TED Talk with 35 slides and no words. I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But he told me your mission in any presentation is to inform, educate, and inspire. You can only inspire when you give people a new way of looking at the world in which they live. So give your audiences a new way of looking at the world. Make it novel. Teach me something new. And finally, none of this matters if I can't remember and recite and repeat what you just said. So present content in ways I'll never forget. I'm a journalist. Trained journalist. I'm a storyteller. I used to work at CNN and many other platforms, and I still write for Forbes and Entrepreneurs, so I look at everything through the lens of a story. Here are some techniques that you can use in your very next pitch or presentation that is almost guaranteed to work every single time. I know not to give you 100% guarantees, but this is pretty close. I'm going to give you 3 techniques. The first technique that nearly always works is creating a headline. Thank you, Twitter. I like Twitter as an exercise. If you cannot tell me what you do in 140 characters, go back to the drawing board. There is a reason why I need to see the big picture before details. This is the way our brains evolve to process information. I learned this from John Medina at the University of Washington Medical School. He said, Carmine, when primitive man ran into a tiger, he did not ask, how many teeth does the tiger have? He asked, will that thing eat me? Should I run? Big picture before details. Let's travel back to 2008, the first introduction of the MacBook Air. I think most presenters would have delivered a slide sort of like this. The MacBook Air, we are really excited to introduce this new product. It's a thin, lightweight notebook computer, 13-inch widescreen display, backlit keyboard, Intel processor. What's the problem? One, it's sort of a boring slide, but what's the other problem? Too many details. Steve Jobs, the brilliant communicator that he was, always framed every product or idea in one sentence. He called the MacBook Air the world's thinnest notebook. If that's all you know, it tells you a lot. Now you can fill out the rest of the story. How thin is it? How did you get it so thin? Are there customers that actually want this new device? You could fill out the rest of the story, but I got to see the big picture before the details. Yesterday at dinner, I turned to one of the entrepreneurs in the room, Eric Frankiel. He's the CEO of MemSQL. I asked him, Eric, what is MemSQL? The world's fastest database. In one sentence, I got it immediately. The world's fastest database. And he's been thinking over the last couple of years about how to refine his story. So he's constantly thinking about communication. And he even told me, Carmine, I need a hook. I need a headline so you can understand my story. So he's already thinking about it. The second technique for all of you who deliver PowerPoint or Apple Keynote or any type of presentation tool, please start thinking visually. We're visual people. We're visual storytellers. If I deliver information verbally, you'll remember about 10% of the content. If I add a picture, retention soars to 65%. The average PowerPoint slide has 40 words. That's not too hard for us to believe. If you analyze the world's greatest, most inspiring corporate storytellers, you will be hard-pressed to find 40 words in 10 of their slides. I remember breaking down Steve Jobs, a 90-minute presentation by Steve Jobs. It took at least 10 slides, if not more, before he reached 40 words. Obviously, he used Apple Keynote, not PowerPoint, but it's the same idea. Why? Because he's telling a story instead. Let's go back to the MacBook Air. I think the average mediocre presenter would have created a slide that looks something like this. Why? Because most of us need to put all of the information on one slide instead of thinking about it visually. What's the visual story I'm trying to portray? Here's the Steve Jobs slide. What's more memorable? What's more impactful? Because all of us know that tangible feeling of opening those office envelopes and unroping that small red string. This was brilliant. This takes creativity, though. You got to really think about it. But what's more memorable? My slide that I created, which the average person would, or this? You have to think visually about information. The slides on all of the best 500 TED Talks are photographs, images, or animations. Finally, I want to leave you with this. The third technique that will make your next pitch or presentation memorable is sticking to the rule of 3. The rule of 3, which you're going to hear a little bit too from Venod coming up. The rule of 3 simply means that in short-term memory, we can only remember about 3 or 4 key points. of information. This is an infographic that somebody sent to me after I wrote about it for a Forbes piece. I love this. Slogans are often broken up into threes, the most memorable slogans, like yes we can or just do it. Colors of the flag are often in threes. Certainly in literature, the Three Musketeers, the Three Little Pigs, the three Bears. I have the right to life, liberty, and happiness, not 18 rights. Thomas Jefferson was a brilliant writer. The rule of three. So incorporate it in your presentations. Bill Gates has been thinking about this. Brilliant. In January, when Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation released their annual newsletter, there were three myths that block poverty for the poor. I knew instantly that that's going to be the headline on all of the blogs, on all of the newspapers, and sure enough, I was right. Threes. It's almost impossible for a person to ignore lists. And the shorter the list, the better. But 3 to 5 seems to be the magic number. Jimmy Fallon even asked, Bill Gates was on Jimmy Fallon's show, and Jimmy was asking him, so tell me about these 3 myths. Lists, and we know this as journalists, lists work really well. Give people 3 reasons to invest. 3 new features of this product that will improve your life. 3, 4, or 5. Take a look at the 2005 commencement address from Steve Jobs, one of the most popular commencement addresses of our time. He intuitively understood the power of 3. This entire presentation was built in this structure. Do what you love is the headline. We just talked about that. What is the one theme that you want to get across? Do what you love. Supported by 3 key messages. Connect the dots, love and loss, death. Each of the supporting 3 messages had 3 examples under each one. The rule of 3. So those are 3 very powerful methods of making sure your story sticks and is memorable. Create a headline, think visually when you're delivering the information, and stick to the rule of 3. Those are the 3 components that all inspiring stories share. They are emotional, novel, memorable. You need to have all 3. But finally, I just want to end on this note. Don't forget that you're selling dreams, not products. Nobody cares about your idea. Nobody cares about your product. They care about themselves. We're a little self-absorbed as people. We care about our hopes, our goals, our dreams, our ambitions. If you can communicate your story in a way that connects your idea to my life, and you can show me clearly and compellingly how your product or idea will help me prosper, will help me reach my goals and my dreams, that's when you win me over. Thank you for inviting me. Venod, thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.